Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In this video I just wanted to show you guys my recommended settings for Warzone, specifically the graphics settings to try and achieve the best performance as possible. Good way you can kind of gauge this is by turning on your FPS counter. You can do that if you go into General, you scroll down into where it says Telemetry. It'll be the first one if you're on PC. And on console, I don't think you can turn the setting on. You might be able to, but I'm not sure. So you'll just want to enable that, and then we can go ahead and get started. So first up on the list, we have display mode. And typically this won't make a big difference. If you run in windowed mode, it'll have less pixels for the GPU to render. But the downside is then you'll have a smaller viewing area by a little bit, because you'll have that Windows bar at the top. So that's not exactly ideal. So for me, typically I run either full screen or full screen borderless. It really doesn't matter because it doesn't change anything. Probably what makes the biggest difference as far as performance goes and image quality would be your render resolution. So ideally, if your system is struggling, you'll want to lower this maybe just a little bit to where you still retain pretty good image quality, but your graphics card can keep up a little better. So this single setting right here will make the biggest difference concerning that. The only downside is the lower you go, the worse image quality you'll have, but the higher you go, the better quality you'll have. You could, if you have a very, very powerful machine, set this all the way up. The only problem with that is it's typically pretty heavy on most machines, so I just run at 100. Even though I have a newer graphics card, I get the best performance when I just run at my native resolution. And then you can, depending on which full screen or display mode you're in, you can adjust to various resolutions. Like if you wanted to use some sort of, quote-unquote stretch resolution, you could do that, but it really doesn't make that big of a difference, so I recommend just running whatever your native display is. Next we have aspect ratio. I would recommend automatic, unless you prefer having like black bars across your screen. But then again, it's how you like to play. For competitive play, like if you're not playing the campaign or some sort of single player mode, I would definitely recommend leaving VSync disabled, because it'll cause a lot of input lag, but you won't have any screen tearing. And then for the best experience, leaving your frame rate at unlimited. It'll allow your graphics card to basically dish out as many frames as it can. Okay, streaming quality. What this will do is it'll render the textures as quickly as it can, but preferring performance if it's on low. But if you put it to normal, what it'll do is it'll try and render as many textures as possible to basically make the game look more appealing. So if you're playing competitively, I would recommend putting this on low. And next we have texture resolution. This one, there's a lot of debate that goes into this. Modern Warfare and Warzone not being very optimized games. It really depends on your machine and your hardware. So I would recommend kind of messing with this to see which one gives you the best frame rate. For me, for some reason, if I run on high, I get the highest frame rates. But every machine is different and every graphics card is different, so I would recommend just messing around with that and seeing what gives you the best performance. And texture filter anisotropic, however you pronounce that. Really, as you can see here in the picture, it just makes surfaces more detailed. Really, again, that's personal preference. I just leave mine off because I don't really care about that. Plus I did some testing and it seemed to put a little bit more of a load on my card than I wanted it to. So again, it's really up to you. If you want the best performance, I would recommend leaving this on low. And then particle quality. This is one I really prefer to leave on high because it really makes certain effects in the game much easier to see. Like for example, the glint off of someone's sniper scope, it makes it a lot easier to see when it's on high because it's a much sharper image. And when it's on low, it really looks very fuzzy, and sometimes in certain scenarios it's a little hard to distinguish. So I recommend leaving this on high if your machine can handle it. If you're having lots of stuttering and just hitching in general, I would recommend putting this on low. Now, bullet impacts and sprays, from my testing, this really doesn't make a difference. I just prefer to leave it off because I don't really like getting distracted by you know, bullet impacts and stuff like that. So I just leave mine off. Now, tessellation, it's kind of similar to this setting right here, the anisotropic setting, or however you pronounce that. It just makes surfaces more detailed. So really it's kind of unnecessary. So in my opinion, I just disable this. And on-demand texture streaming, this is absolutely pointless if you're playing competitively, because it'll cause an extra strain on your internet connection, so it could lead to more lag and just input lag and all sorts of other bad things that competitive play doesn't really want. And so for shadows and lighting as a whole, I would recommend disabling everything except for caching spot shadows and caching sun shadows, because what this will do is the shadows that are basically the shadows you can't disable, it'll store these, or it'll, you know, cache it in your RAM so that it makes it easier for them to be loaded when they're needed. So in turn, that allows you to get higher FPS. So I would recommend leaving these two on and everything else disable or put to low. And now here in post-processing, just like the shadows, I would recommend disabling everything here, especially anti-aliasing, because all this does, as you can tell from the images here, all it does is smooth sharpened edges a little bit. But in turn, a lot of times what ends up happening is you get a really fuzzy display. So everything, it'll kind of look foggy and it won't be very distinct. So I recommend turning this on off. If you are kind of annoyed by sharp edges, I would recommend putting this on SM AA 1X, but no higher. But again, it's personal preference, but this will just put a lot of unnecessary strain on your graphics card for smoothing out edges, so I recommend just leaving this off. And then depth of field, this frankly is really stupid because it blurs out stuff near you, just making it more realistic, so this is totally pointless as far as competitive play goes. And then motion blur, this is another dumb feature, it just makes the game more realistic. But as you can see, while you're moving, it'll blur everything out. So yeah, I recommend disabling this and weapon motion blur. This, I guess, since it's not blurring out the view in front of you, it doesn't really matter, but still I just disable it because it's frankly pointless. And film grain, this, I don't really understand why this is here, but you know, if you want to adjust this, that's up to you. It doesn't really make a difference on your frames per second. And then dynamic resolution. All this does right here is, instead of you adjusting your render resolution up here, if you want, you can come down to the dynamic resolution and the dynamic resolution frame rate target, and you can adjust based on your display what kind of frames per second you're trying to achieve. And if you enable this, what will happen is the game will automatically render whatever resolution it needs to achieve a constant, you know, whatever frames per second you want. And so those are pretty much all the settings that you need to worry about as far as performance goes. So I hope this helped you guys understand a little bit better what things do what here. And If you guys have any other questions about any other settings you guys want me to highlight or try to explain, just let me know in the comments. I really appreciate your time tuning in, and I'll see you next time.